Hello, welcome to the training on adding RTI Authentication to an existing programming project. In this session, we will discuss the following topics: preparation, system setup and programming, configuring the RTI Authentication dashboard, client information entry and testing. Let's begin. First, make sure you have a 64-bit PC running Windows 10 or higher as its native operating system. Next, always make sure you have the latest Integration Designer programming software on your computer. RTI Authentication is only available on version 11.3 and higher. This should be done automatically if your computer is online when you open the software, but a manual check can be done by clicking on Help and then Check for Updates. Finally, RTI Authentication requires a firmware update to the XP processor line. This can be done through the network or via USB Direct Connect under the Communications tab. Upon opening the existing project file, Integration Designer may ask you if you want to update the file to the latest version of the software. Click OK if prompted and it will proceed. Now, we will add any new driver-based sources needed and check the existing ones to see if any of them need to be updated. We will add the Genie Garage Door driver, Door 1, to the global area, and then check the source list for any updates needed. Any updates to driver sources needed will be indicated with an exclamation point on the workspace source driver itself. Select that source and click Update Driver to proceed with getting the latest version. Next, you will need to make sure all the source drivers have been properly configured. For example, the recently added Genie driver needs to be set up so that the processor can find it on the network. We will enter the serial number and choose Door 1 from the drop-down. Once you have completed all the additions and updates, the driver sources that have RTI authentication capabilities will be ready. The next step is only needed if you are reusing an existing project file within a completely new project. Click on the System Properties under the File drop-down in the upper left-hand corner of Integration Designer. Select the Zone tab, and under that Zone tab, we will see Network Key. We will click on the Generate New Encryption Key button and then press OK to close the window. Remember, this is only needed when you are reusing the project file within a new system. Next, we will check to see if any of the recently updated or newly added source drivers require authentication. Select the processor from the workspace and then choose Settings under the Connected Features. Here, you will see the following: System Name, RTIQ Monitoring, and Driver Authentication Dashboard. Let's go through these one by one, beginning with System Name. This is where we name the system for our RTIQ Monitoring Dashboard. We recommend you change this from the processor name to the name and or location of the client for easier identification within the RTIQ Monitoring Dashboard, RTI Panel Multi-Location feature, or anywhere else that the system name may be needed. Recommendations such as G. Jetson Home or the Smith Apartment Building 1 would suffice. Next is RTIQ Monitoring section. It is recommended that you enable all your systems with RTIQ monitoring so that you can take advantage of our free remote monitoring service. There is an additional training available on how to do this and the features within on the RTI Excel website. The Driver Authentication Dashboard is where we need to focus our attention. Under the Authentication URL buttons will be information pertaining to any source drivers that will require the processor to authenticate the client's credentials. If there are no source drivers that require this, it will be stated as such. However, in this case, there is a driver that does require it, so we must upload the programming file first to the processor before we can proceed. We will click the Send to Device button and only load the file onto the XP processor. Don't load the rest of the files onto any RTI devices yet, just that XP processor. The reason for this is that the processor itself, not Integration Designer, needs to activate and establish the authentication communication between it and the client's account. Once the file is loaded onto the processor, select it again from the workspace, and then choose the Settings under Connected Features. The authentication URL is what you or your client will need to set up the necessary sources with the client's credentials. This has two options, Copy URL and Launch URL. If we click Copy URL, it will copy the address above to our clipboard, and we can email or text it to our client. They will then be able to launch it from their device, input their credentials for the necessary source device. If we click on Launch URL, Integration Designer will immediately open the default browser window and launch the URL. This page, same as what the client would see, is where you can identify and select the available source driver devices that use RTI Authentication. We will select the device and input the proper login and password for the client. Keep in mind that they will need to have set up an account with that company already. We can continue to program the rest of the system file, including the activities, user interface design, and automations, as it is not dependent on the RTI authentication credentials information. The final step in the process is to test the overall system to make sure that it's fully functional, easy to operate, and exactly what the client is expecting. In summary, the process is straightforward for using the new RTI authentication within an existing project. First, we add or update the source drivers to the existing system file workspace. Always make sure to configure those sources for proper communication. Next, if we're reusing a program file on a new project, we need to make sure to create a new network encryption key under the system properties. Next, we'll check the processor authentication dashboard if authentication is needed, and if so, load the processor file from Integration Designer onto that XP processor. Finally, we'll launch or send the client the URL from the authentication dashboard and have them enter in and set up those sources with the proper credentials. The new RTI authentication is designed specifically to help dealers minimize truck rolls, increase client satisfaction through greater security, lower overhead programming costs and labor costs, which in turn increases overall profitability. Additionally, this type of setup allows RTI to offer new control options within third-party devices that require this type of configuration and authentication. Stay tuned for some really cool additions to the driver library. If you have any additional questions, feel free to contact your regional sales engineer for additional information. Thanks for watching.